Welcome to the Water People podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Hill, joined by our co-host, Dave Rastovich. This season is supported by Patagonia, whose purpose-driven mission is to use business to save our home planet. Today, we're in conversation with Peggy Oki. She's a surfer, skater, rock climber, animal activist, and visual artist who has adventured between these creative expressions for more than 50 years. As a member of the Zephyr skateboard team in the 1970s, made mainstream famous by the documentary Dogtown and Z-Boys, Peggy was at the top of the women's skateboarding world, while pioneering the vertical skating movement alongside the Dogtown crew of Jay Adams, Tony Alva, and Stacy Peralta as the lone Z girl. Parallel to living an adventurous life by way of stone and water, Peggy has become a tireless activist for the well-being of all beings. Her Origami Whales project, an installation of 38,000 cascading paper whales, was recently showcased at the Smithsonian Institution. Peggy began the project in 2004 to raise awareness about the potential reemergence of sanctioned commercial whaling. That number, 38,000, represents the approximate number of whales killed since the International Whaling Commission's moratorium on whaling in 1986. We caught up with Peggy as she made her way down the Australian coast on a flat, warm spring day between surfs and on the way to the rock climbing gym before the first east swell of the season lit up the coast. We acknowledge the Bundjalung Nation, the first and ongoing custodians of the land and waters where we work and play, who have lived, worked, and cared for this sea country for tens of thousands of years. Respect and gratitude to all First Nations people who continue to practice the cultural, spiritual, and educational customs of their ancestors. We always begin these conversations in the same place, and that's by asking about a time or experience after which you were never the same. Would you be willing to share a story like that with us?
Sure. Thank you for asking. On Christmas morning of 1999, so the last Christmas of the millennium, surfing at Black's Beach, and that's in Southern California, kind of near San Diego area. Really fun wave, and the waves were about head high, my favorite size and shape. It was this beautiful, lovely day, not crowded. Warm, one of those typical, at least half the time on Christmas Day in California, it's really warm and sunny and beautiful. And it was one of those days, and I'd caught a fun wave, was paddling back out, and just sat up on my board in the lineup when I looked over to my left about let's see, that'd be maybe 16 meters away, 50 feet. This gray whale surfaced. It raised its head up and spy hopped looking at me. and it was, I don't have any fear of whales or most animals, other than some of the really gnarly ones, of course. But it was just this incredible moment to be eye to eye with a gray whale. And then it just, very gracefully, slowly went back underwater. And then another gray whale passed by it. And it just raised its arching back and went under, and they disappeared. And there were a couple other surfers that were kind of nearby, and they were just like, oh, wow. And I was too. And I really felt like that was meant to be. And so I asked myself, because I'd already been an activist working for dolphins, and then I thought, I wonder if the whales want me to do something. I wonder if they know something about me. And so I started doing a little research and found that there was a salt mining project, a salt mining factory project that was proposed for San Ignacio Lagoon, which is one of the prime nursing and calving grounds for the gray whales. And the Mexican government was working with Mitsubishi Corporation to do this, and it would have caused a severe environmental impact on that calving and nursing ground. And various environmental organizations were on this, trying to prevent that from happening. And about just a couple months into it, victory was announced.
Wow.
They pulled out of that project. Yeah, so it was like, hooray. And then I thought, well, what else is happening with whales? And then I learned that whaling was still going on, commercial whaling by Japan and Norway. And I thought, that's insane. That, it was supposed to have stopped in 1986 with the International Whaling Commission's whaling moratorium. And so that's something that I got much more into. And literally, with all that, I just really dove into more and more of my activism and have worked hard. and I say, those darn whales, they changed my life, but in a beautiful way.
I didn't realize that that's where that started, maybe not so much started, but where you really kicked into sort of whale gear, I guess, because you're working with dolphin issues before that. And isn't it remarkable how often people working in whale or dolphin conservation, cetacean conservation, have had just a small moment like that can be such a impactful, though pretty subtle experience. And I just wonder your thinking around it, like, why did your response be, I think the whales want me to do something with them? Because probably those two surfers who are sitting next to you went, cool, man. Oh, hey, look at this left. I'm going to go left. You're going to go right, and split the peak at Blacks. And they probably didn't think of it again unless they told their buddies that night with a beer or a cup of tea, and then that would have been it. But you responded in that way. Can you tell us perhaps why?
Well, it actually goes back even further to when I was learning about dolphin surfing. And I thought, wow, I'm a surfer, dolphins surf. We share the ocean in such a joyous way, this play. And I've learned about what was happening to dolphins at that time and wanted to do something for them. So there was that. And then my first time seeing them was in between Yamba and Angari. Dolphin surfing. And I went, and I literally started to almost cry just with joy to see that. But I think that as far as this connection, I think that some people are maybe more open to what animals seem to be telling us. Whether that's totally true or not, I think that there's a lot of possibility in that animals. We think of like humans. The human race has developed in a way where we have the language, the human language, and our senses through different forms of communications on phones and this and that. But animals have pretty much remained in their natural state. And I feel like that is something, their forms of communication and their senses of knowing where to find food, where there's danger, where there's their mates and all that sense is something that we may have lost as humans. A lot of humans may have lost because we've turned to other things such as the language that we've developed and this and that, whereas the animals have these senses about them. Like, it's really funny because my friends call me the dog whisperer. Because one example was when I was out rock climbing, and I saw a dog sitting with this group of climbers, and I just, as I always do, very friendly and with respect and some caution also, I just said, "Oh, hey, doggy, hey, sweetie," and the dog just like looked at me and said, "Ah," and let me pet it and such. And then the people, there were actually some people that I knew, and the owner said, "Oh, wow, that's really odd. He usually doesn't like people." And then my friend said, "She's a dog whisperer." and it's just respecting animals and approaching them in that way and being in a vibe of harmlessness, I guess.
Yeah. Has that always been that way for you since you were little?
Maybe not always, but for the most part, yeah, I've always been an animal lover.
Were your parents, was your greater family that way as well?
My dad seemed to like dogs. My mom wasn't that big on animals. Yeah.
Peggy, you're a surfer, you're an artist, and an activist. I'm interested in this coalescent moment, or what it seems from the outside, when you were studying biology, and you said that, quote, "Your studies led me to illustrate wild animals in their natural habitats." You were studying biology, and with biology often comes a more objectifying scientific point of view. I'm interested to know what led you away from that point of view and toward a more personifying, compassionate approach to the living world.
Yes, truly at that time, scientists were really kind of locked into sort of a paradigm of we have to be very serious and you know, even though we may really appreciate and love these animals that we're studying, we're not going to express that very much. But I'm seeing some change in that slowly, and that some scientists are coming out and speaking more about conservation, which before that might not have been as much of a topic as just presenting this information kind of thing. And what kind of steered me away from it was probably that it wasn't like something that was off-putting. I really appreciate everything that I've learned, and there's sort of like a scientific protocol to present information that's accurate. I just appreciate that part of science, because then it's when a scientist presents something that's actually factual and unrefutable, then hopefully they're saying something like, from our research, we've determined that there's only 50 of these individuals left, and we really need to do something to protect them. And it was kind of more on that end of it, where seeing even back then species being threatened and habitats lost and such, that I felt that my direction was more out in the world, not studying and doing the research, but taking from the research and reports and things and saying, hey, this is what's going on here, people.
Science can be so amazing at helping us understand generalizations and patterns in the world. But what touches me so deeply about your work and your activism is the way you personify individuals in other species. And that's not to say that you're anthropomorphizing them. I think that's a really nuanced and important conversation, that we can acknowledge individuals as unique beings in the world without making them human-like, acknowledging, like you were saying before, the senses and the sensitivities of other living beings, without stepping on the toes of science and applying human characteristics to them.
Yes, and that I agree with that as far as the whole thing about anthropomorphizing, because that's something that scientists have always tried to steer clear of, and I still don't anthropomorphize either. I see animals as their own, and the really wild thing is, the more people tune in and are open to observing animals, they can see there are different personalities and preferences in one species, you know, in all these different species, you'll see the way they behave and stuff. That was the part of science that I really was fascinated the most by, was studying animal behavior. Yeah.
Peggy, maybe we met earlier or at a different time, but one of my first memories of our paths crossing was at the International Whaling Commissions, and I really loved your artful interpretation of activism and engaging people through your origami whale project. And I was just wondering if you could describe that to people, because my experience of it, I thought it was incredibly beautiful and a wonderful thing to see children engaging and lots of people engaging with that.
Yeah, and thank you for being one of the crew that helped to hang the curtain at the Performing Arts Center, because really I don't know if I could have done it without you all.
Well, I do have very long arms. I've got a pretty good reach. It's an upside of being a Neanderthal-style man.
Well, we all bring to the planet our own contributions.
When you had that feeling through encountering the grey whale, when you have that motivating force inside you to act and then to respond so artfully, where does that come from for you?
Well, I think that just sort of being an artist, being open to ideas and having ideas evolve. Because my first things that I did for whales was to go to schools and give lectures, quick lectures, short, a brief introduction about how cool whales are, and get kids excited about them, and then share the news about, did you know they're being whaled? And then the kids have such open hearts, and they care, they want to do something. And so I would empower them by saying, do you want to do some paintings that we'll send to the President of the United States and ask him to help stop whaling? And so that was the beginnings of it. And then eventually, through working with the Santa Barbara Whale Festival, we did art postcards. And then the following year, it was proposed that we do origami sea creatures. And from that idea, I went, oh, we could do origami whales. And what about a goal that's something like the story of Sadako Sasaki in the Peace Cranes, where her goal was to fold 1,000 cranes. And so why don't we do something like that? And then it turned out that year 1,400 whales were going to be killed. That was in the quotas. So that was our goal. And so then this whole thing snowballed from that to representing eventually, as you saw in Anchorage, the number of whales that had been reported killed since the International Whaling Commission's whaling moratorium was supposed to be in effect. So that went to that number, and the number kept growing as the curtain kept growing, as I was adding more whales to represent those numbers. And then it that project kind of went on the back burner for a little bit. But then just this year, I got into discussion with some other artists and a curator from the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and they're having a folk life festival, which was going to be hosting various environmental booths, including art. And so I was part of this artist group, and I suggested the idea of more origami whales and dolphins to create basically kind of a curtain, sort of a wall of origami whales and dolphins attached to fishing net. And so that evolved into this whole thing of being at the festival and literally talking, as I'm talking about the evolving art from one idea, like, okay, let's do origami whales and dolphins. What are we going to do? Oh, let's attach them to a net. And then once I got there and we were setting up everything, I thought, instead of randomly attaching like I first thought, why don't I create a mosaic of a humpback whale and then another mosaic of dolphins? And so then I was just going to do a couple of bottlenose dolphins or something on the other dolphin net, but I thought, wait a minute, why don't I put up the endangered dolphins, a Maui dolphin and a vaquita porpoise? So that's what I did, mosaics of those.
Right.
And so it's really wonderful how art can evolve and how there is some flexibility towards that.
Yeah, totally.
Peggy, I'm curious about the use of origami in particular and what significance that's had for you, if any.
It's really funny because my heritage is Japanese American, born and raised in the States, in California. But I've been to Hiroshima a couple of times because that's where my family roots are. My grandparents were there, my parents. And so that's how I became aware of Sadako Sasaki's Peace Cranes. But I didn't really do a lot of folding of origami. But it started with the Whale Festival, basically, and then the Origami Whales project forming from that. I think it's really a fun sort of art form. It's pretty cool. There's some very complex things.
It can be both accessible and awe-inspiringly difficult, right?
Yeah. And I'd like to add that when I ask people to fold origami whales and dolphins, this started after our first curtain of 2,285. I said, we're using paper. How about if we reuse paper? So I've got it on the website and everything. If you're going to make these, please upcycle, reuse paper. You can find all kinds of cool papers, gift wrap, magazines, all sorts of nice paper. So we're saving trees while we're saving whales.
Peggy, you opened with a story about a moving moment from your surfing life that changed you. I guess parallel to your surfing life, you were an absolutely shredding, groundbreaking skater. And I'm interested to know how those two parallel lives informed one another.
Well, I would say that I started skateboarding a lot many years before I started surfing.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then, but then I started skateboarding, and it was so treacherous back in those days with the rock wheels. Yep. So I kind of put the skateboard away for a while. And then when I started to learn to surf on those flat days, I would get out a skateboard and by then the urethane wheels had come out. Mm. And so I started skateboarding to just practice the surfing moves, and then it turned out that I got on the Zephyr skateboard team. I was invited then from, I guess they saw me practicing on Bicknell Hill, which is right by where I used to surf. Yeah, and I like surfing and surfing moves, so it was really fun to do it on a skateboard.
Were you, at that time, I guess in my mind is that culture of that place and that time, it doesn't strike me as a place that would pop out lots and lots of animal lovers and like animal activists, environmentalists. Like, you know, it's an urban, pretty gritty zone, a pretty gritty part of America. What were your interests then? Obviously skating and surfing, but were you going around and patting stray dogs and already having that kind of interest with animals then too, or were you a complete surf skate rat?
Before becoming a surf skate rat, I was already very much interested in animals and nature. I grew up about, I guess it'd be roughly 7 miles away, in kind of like inland, sort of south from the Venice Beach area, Venice Santa Monica area, and there were some vacant fields near where my parents' house was, and so we would go and adventure, and with little Schwinn bicycles. We were the pre-BMXers, and we would have, you know, just the kids in my neighborhood. We would all get together and play and things, and sometimes we'd play in those fields and see animals. Sometimes, not many, because even then it was already starting to, the whole urban thing was encroaching. But just having that little bit of nature, I think, helped me to appreciate the wild animals, and so that was already part of me before I got into the surfing and skating thing with the Zephyr team. Yeah.
I'm also curious about the ocean around Southern California at that time. A few years ago, we got in our little Hobies and sailed and mostly pedaled because there was no wind that year, but from the ranch to San Diego, basically. And there was so many animals in that stretch of coastline butted up against so many human animals. And it was really striking for all of us who'd come from Australia and other parts of the world to see that you've got super pods of dolphins straight out of LA Harbour there. And we were in among hundreds of them one day. Then we encountered blue whales straight off Newport Beach. They came directly under our crafts, like just the biggest animal ever. It was unbelievable. And so much activity right there, even with so much urbanisation and industrial human material happening on that shoreline. I don't even know what you'd call it. I'm at a loss for words, but military, industrial, domestic, everything right there. When you were a young lady surfing there, were you seeing all of that out in the water as well? Were there those kind of numbers? Were there grey whales around? Was it like that, or was it pretty quiet?
First, I want to say good on you for that journey. I remember that. I remember you taking that and the experience with the blue whales, because that is quite something to have blue whales come up to you. That's very rare. I think, like I was saying, the animals know. Yeah, so that's I think an acknowledgement to all the good things you're doing. And when I was learning to surf, there weren't really a lot of animals around. This is at Santa Monica, but maybe sometimes further up the coast where it wasn't as developed, like Zuma Beach or something, there might have been some more pelicans flying over and such. And then, of course, living a little bit further north than that in southern Santa Barbara County, surfing Rincon and stuff, that's where I've seen a fair amount, a lot of dolphins and seals and sea lions and various seabirds. And I think that where there's larger sized urban population that maybe there's less, I don't Wow. But it sounds like you got to see a lot, which is...
Yeah, it was such a surprise because we were just, coming in and camping and sleeping along the beach fronts of, that section of coast. And we were sleeping on concrete and right next to the railway tracks or right next to the freeway. We had people camping in their big RVs telling us how many types of concrete and asphalt there was and how great it was and all this stuff. And it was so humanized. But then we would go out and just past the kelp line is all this activity. And it was really quite shocking and amazing.
I would just hand it to the incredible resilience of nature, of the living beings on this planet that have been here for millions and millions of years, just being able to get on. Yeah. It's really, really beautiful.
You've spent a lot of time surf traveling, Peggy. And actually that makes me wonder, when you're thinking about traveling to get surf, do you also hold in your mind putting yourself in a position to encounter whales or dolphins or other creatures? Is that part of the planning process?
Well, I'm always open to that happening. And if I know of certain sightings of cetaceans or other wildlife in the area, I'm going, I wonder if there's going to be a humpback whale swimming by here today or something.
Yeah. I wonder if you could recount an especially memorable experience for us, whether that's in the surf or with other cetaceans in the water.
Well, I would say that I shared the one about the whale, but it's been really interesting with the dolphins. And one time, I'll share one story. I was out surfing, the beach break above Rincon, and it was pretty small. Like, I don't think anybody else was out because I just go out there to play because the water's warm and go, I'm going to go in the ocean. I love being in the ocean. And I had parked my vehicle up on the top of the cliff in the parking lot and then went down the track and I surfed. And these two dolphins, while I'm just sitting on my board, they leaped out of the water and crossed over each other. Like in these, dolphin shows and things, but it would happen right in front of me in the wild, and it was like, that's so cool. And then I went back up to my truck after surfing and all that, and somebody had broken into my truck and stolen my skateboard and some other things, but fortunately I'm able to get those things on flow, so it was replaceable. Yeah. And, they took my wallet. And then, but then a few hours later, somebody turned the wallet into the police department. I think they got my credit card or whatever, but at least my driver's license, my library card, some of these precious things were still in the wallet. And I just thought about what had happened, and I thought, and they broke my window too. But I thought, well, that's something that somebody did, but there's no one's going to ever take away from me that experience with the dolphins.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And of course, there's been many other experiences, but that was kind of like this really cool sort of reminder.
It's so funny telling those sort of stories. I always find myself feeling like the story's so big and so meaningful to me, but whenever I tell other people, when I hear the words coming out of my mouth, they sound quite small and trivial. Like when you tell people that you look at the expression on their face expecting them to light up and be like, wow, that's unbelievable. But they never seem to really light up as much as we do when we recount and think about those encounters with whales and dolphins. And I feel like there's just probably so much going on in those encounters that we don't understand, that our language, which is very small, especially in comparison to cetacean language, we know their vocabularies outcount ours by like 5 or 6 times. We know their acoustic range is way above and way below ours. There's so much being communicated by them in that moment between themselves. Maybe they're trying to tune in and say something to us, but we, have nothing to say back. We're pretty limited. So I do feel like there's a lot going on in those encounters, and that when we make a life decision or change a trajectory in our life because of those encounters, it is hard to explain. It is hard to communicate really accurately to other people how much they can mean to us, those moments. But it's fun trying, and it's great to share that, and it's neat to think that maybe other people will pursue that instead of going to SeaWorld and those kind of places, and have a real encounter with these animals in their home habitat. So thanks for sharing that. I'm sorry if I didn't respond as big as you wanted, but I know that feeling. I have a lot of those stories myself.
The shark story?
Yeah, which is interesting, because that was also at Yamba and Angari when you had your dolphin encounter.
That was where it happened? Oh, goodness.
Yeah. So that was right there off the tip of the headland at Lovers, the surf spot Lovers. Yeah.
Those experiences feel like gifts to a lot of us. And that's one of the themes we've been exploring this season on the podcast, Peggy, is about the gift exchange in parallel or in contrast to the economy of ownership or private gain that we've sort of, our culture has found itself in. In Robin Wall Kimmerer's book, Braiding Sweetgrass. I don't know if you've read it or not.
No, but I've heard of it.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And we quoted her earlier in the season. She writes beautifully about the bundle of rights and responsibilities attached to any gift. And I was so curious to ask you about in what ways you felt a sense of responsibility to surfing or to art or to skating, or maybe none of them, and how you've acted on that sense of responsibility. And I guess specifically if you see your artwork as part of that gift exchange.
I would say that I have a real appreciation of the ocean through surfing. And surfing really brought me back into the ocean. I actually nearly drowned twice when I was a kid. Wow. Once in the swimming pool and once in the shore break. And so I was really afraid of things like swimming and going in the ocean, putting my face in the water and stuff. But then when I eventually tried surfing and started surfing, it really gave me this joy and this connection back with our Mother Ocean. And then studying the biology and things, and learning about what's happening in the world's oceans and to ocean beings and things, I've felt that the gift that's come to me of my life in the ocean, I'm giving back through speaking out as an activist. Also through my art, I was doing different things and expressing my love and hopefully raising awareness about whales and dolphins. And I think that art is such a great opportunity for that.
Can we zoom in on one of those, initiatives or expressions and go to Aotearoa and Raglan and the Maui and the Popoto dolphin? Because I know in Lauren's notes she was keen for us to go there. Did you have anything in your mind, Lauren?
We were all there last time. I guess we were all together. We were in Aotearoa in New Zealand. I wouldn't say working. I would say playing on a campaign to help local folks stop sand mining, which was threatening the habitat of the Popoto dolphin. I'd love for you to update us on that campaign if you know where they're at with the population of the Popoto.
I've been doing a little bit of looking up to make sure that I was providing some accurate information. And the most recent studies have come out that there's only an estimated 54 adult Maoris over the age of 1, which is, in other words, it's dropped 14% since the previous study a few years before that. So the population has continued to decline. I've asked some friends, I said, so is this more of the New Zealand government doing nothing or doing too little? And the friend responded, I've got to quote this. I told her that I was going to be doing this podcast with you, Lauren and Dave. And Christine responded, please give our regards to Dave. The anniversary of his epic paddle along the West Coast has just passed, and our gratitude remains.
Oh, that's sweet.
Last year saw an extension of the West Coast set net ban, which was a great initiative, but trawling still occurs in some of their habitat, and observer coverage is inadequate. So while it's not quite do nothing from this government, it's definitely not doing enough for Maui and Hector's cousins. And then she said, unfortunately, there are no current consultations open and no active reconsideration for more protections of the Maui and Hector's dolphins. That's what I was hoping I'd hear, that there would be submissions opening soon so that we can again have open ears with the government. And it says here, DOC, the Department of Conservation, and Fisheries New Zealand informed us at recent meeting that observer coverage was not conducted across the full protection area. The protection area also fails to cover the whole dolphin range. And the latter is definitely something that a lot of us conservationists have been pushing for, is to cover the entire range of the dolphin and not part of it. They have increased it slightly according to Christine, but they still need to cover the entire area. There's only 54 adults left. And apparently according to Steve Lawson, who's with Whale and Dolphin Trust, he's partners with our dear Elizabeth Slutin. He said that the number of females is an important thing, and he said that there was only something like 14 breeding females, not many. And then to quote Liz, dolphin expert Professor Emeritus Liz Slutin told the Herald, once you get down to around 50, the species can go extinct very quickly without further warning. She said it has been seen in the case of the Baiji Chinese river dolphin, where a population estimate in the late 1990s found about 50 of the animal. When they conducted another estimate between 6 to 8 years later, it had gone extinct. So it's really time to really ramp up the action. And of course, when I'm on the ground, I will be first checking in with Whangarei Environment Center and saying, what are we going to do for the Mauis? Yeah.
Yeah, they're such an incredible creature. You know, these, for listeners who are unaware of this incredible dolphin, they're like tiny orcas almost.
The world's smallest dolphin.
Yep. Black and white and these rounded fins. And
just like the Mickey Mouse.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, they're like the Mickey Mouse of the ocean, exactly. And they're just stunning. Yeah, I think they're so beautiful. When I did that paddle, just before I reached the heads of the river that comes out from Auckland on the west coast, I had a group of them with me. And yeah, it was right now. I completely forgot about the timing. It's so funny. It was right now, because the day I encountered them after paddling up that west coast for a few weeks and not encountering them at all was the anniversary of the day when my dad took his life. So it was a very emotional day for me. I woke up that morning bawling my eyes out, and I was like, oh, all right. And I had a big paddle ahead of me. I had almost 40 Ks or something, 40 to 60 Ks. And I paddled out into the water, started my way up the coast, and the winds never came. And I just had to slog it out in this really long, slow, hard paddle. And after a while, all of a sudden, here come the dolphins. And they're right around my board and right off the bow of the board, and so close I could virtually touch them. I had a little camera on the tail of the board, so I have pictures of it that show it. And they stayed with me for, I can't remember how long now, 20 to 40 minutes or something. But they came with me until I got to the very edge of the mixing of the waters, where the brown, runoff-laden, toxic river water from, the heavy farmed, industrial ag runoff was coming out, and that's where they stopped. They left me there. They turned instantly and went back the other way. So even for me, that there's many, many layers in that experience, like we were talking about before. This kind of magic, hard to decipher, hard to explain feelings and thoughts that come when you have these encounters with these incredibly sensitive creatures. And in that moment, for me, that was a real indicator about that water too, that runoff, that very toxic water coming out of those heads was their line that they just stopped. Maybe they don't always do that, but in my experience, that's what they did, and it really brought home to me the story of New Zealand, the false story of New Zealand, the 100% pure marketing bullshit of New Zealand, and everybody around the world thinking it's this green, clean, pristine country, and it is the furthest thing from it. That experience for me really helped educate me, especially a short film that was actually banned in New Zealand but won many awards in Australia. Won a Qantas award in Australia called Let Us Spray, and it's the history of spraying pesticides, herbicides, the Dow agrochemical plant out of Taranaki area, spraying all over New Zealand. And so this documentary, and also my time there, because I was paddling up and down the coast and visiting with local people, realising how ill the river systems in New Zealand are, how stripped the landscape is, how toxic this supposedly 100% pure place is. And so looking at the story of the Maui's dolphin, that decline in numbers, this coastal dolphin navigating those waters coming out off the land, navigating industrial fishing practices, noise pollution, and various other calamities, challenges for that species, you start to realise how they got down to 50 individuals, how an animal that's been there for as early as you can go back in your mind is down to 50 right now. So I do feel like, your enthusiasm for, come on, let's get busy with this, it's not, the government there is not doing enough, is really valid, but it's also really hidden. I don't think many people speak about New Zealand in this very honest and direct way. It's usually thought of as a refuge from the rest of the world because politically they're quite amazing and there is a small population.
I think it's important to preface that critique really with the fact that you grew up there and your family grew up there and around the can you
New Plymouth there. So exactly. where the Dow agrochemical plant is, Taranaki there on the hill, I have an auntie from there. My mum also lived there for a while when she was young. My auntie has had all kinds of illnesses that you could very rightly stem back to their house being a stone's throw from the plant. Where there's also Agent Orange? Where they're making Agent Orange and for the Vietnam War. So that site there is also, when I did that paddle, we learned it's got the highest rates of miscarriage and Down syndrome in children and cancer, all right there. So anyway, so that's a real hot spot there, and I do feel like it's important to have more of an honest discussion of what is happening in Aotearoa on that ecological level. Mostly for me, I get fired up because of that 100% pure thing. It's just so far from it, and it's a real shame.
I agree with you on that, Dave. Thank you for sharing about. I wasn't aware of that. The Dow plant, is that documentary still banned?
Let Us Spray. I'm sure you can see it online, but it was not. They were trying to screen it like just on television and everything, because within that documentary is the court case where the New Zealand government actually acknowledged that this one family that was riddled with cancer, who worked in that industry, actually got compensation. And so I think part of the problem for the forces that be over there was that it was a milestone case, and that then, lots of people were going to come and do the same thing. So I'm sure you can see it online, Let Us Spray. Okay, yeah. I fully agree with you on that whole marketing strategy of 100% pure and all this. Because everybody who I speak to who haven't been to New Zealand yet, they go, "Oh, it's so beautiful there." Da da da. I go, "Well, it's not as green as you think it is." And I just I don't want to disappoint anybody, but I feel that it's important to be honest and to talk about it.
And you've chosen to spend a lot of time there still.
I have, and I love the country. I love the people. I love the community where I am there. But it is. I believe I agree with you. And I tell people it's only green in color,
Right.
and to know after all these years about the dolphins, the Maui dolphin, and how the government has not taken adequate measures. And they're literally just ignoring that, and then learning about the fisheries industries and the impact, the New Zealand fisheries impact on other endangered species in New Zealand. On top of the Maui and the hectares, there's the blue penguin, right? Is that one of the ones? And then the New Zealand sea lion and other species that are just being decimated by entanglement, bycatch entanglement. And that's what's so great about that documentary Seaspiracy, that I continue to just, put out there, watch Seaspiracy. And then the other documentary that, have you seen the recent one that came out from New Zealand by Amy Taylor? Milked, Milked. And it exposes all these various aspects of the dairy industry in New Zealand, environmental, sociological, health, and literally the things that they presented. I really think it's important for every New Zealander to see, especially every voting New Zealander, and make sure that government is held accountable to what's happening in New Zealand with the dairy industry.
I can't imagine the dairy industry there would be so radically different from industrial dairy anywhere in the world.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, and they did mention the United States and the EU also for the environmental impacts of the dairy industry.
Apologies for interrupting the conversation, but we'd like to take a moment to recognize the generous folks who help make this podcast possible. Sunbutter Skincare is committed to protecting people and the planet. They make vegan, reef-safe SPF 50 sunscreen packaged in reusable and recyclable tins. They're also the world's first certified palm oil-free sunscreen brand. Check out sunbutter.com.au to learn more about their skin and ocean-friendly lines of sunscreen, surf zinc, and skincare. Thanks also to Gary McNeil Concepts, who make cosmic surfboards for cosmic people. Gaz's boards combine recycled and plant-based materials that are built to last without sacrificing performance. To learn more, head to GaryMcNeilConcepts.com.
Peggy, have you ever had a period, because you're such a force in this world, I'm sure listeners can hear in your voice the energy you have when you start speaking about this. Have you had a period where you haven't been so active on that level, thinking of the welfare of others, human or other than human?
I think that in my childhood, I wasn't so much in, speaking out for the environment or animals. In my childhood, I was definitely, though, I had a lot of enthusiasm for what I did, which was things like, like I was saying earlier, riding the Schwinn bikes out on the vacant fields, and where they had like a track sort of laid out, and doing tricks on roller skates, and then getting on the skateboard, all those sort of things. But then it did, I guess you could say, eventually shifted to how much I care about animals and the planet.
What about injury? Because we know you've just gone through that, and that's a period where you really have to look after your earth suit. You've got to turn in a bit more and look at your own system for a while. Can you tell us about what your latest challenge in that?
Yeah, sure. As we know, I've led a very active life. From rock fights with boys, riding bicycles on dirt lots.
Hang on, what rock fight with boys? What are you talking about?
Rock fights. We used to have rock fights. We used to hide behind big dirt piles and throw dirt rocks and dirt clouds at each other.
Okay, keep going. What else is there?
Yeah, and then also I delved briefly into motocross for a couple of years, but then I was going, this is really not environmentally friendly. So then I got into surfing, said that's it, and sold the bike. So I've had many injuries, because it's basically to be expected for anybody who does these sort of things. But this most recent one, I was out rock climbing in Utah with some friends. We had just finished climbing this one area, and we had our gear on our packs, fully loaded, because we use heaps of gear in that particular climbing area. And when I was on the trail, I put my left foot down on the edge of the trail, just thinking, okay, well, this is actually the best part of the trail, which really isn't that good of a trail anyways for climbers. But my footing gave out. And with all that weight, I just went over the side and started tumbling down a steep, rocky, bouldery slope. And it was really wild. Thank goodness I was conscious the whole time, and I was basically almost narrating it in my mind. Oh, I'm going through this big shrub. I think it's going to slow me down. I stopped on a ledge for like 1 second, and I could feel my pack just pulling me again. And then I saw my foot strike a boulder. And I go, oh, sprained ankle. And then I kept rolling. And then I hit my head on the next boulder. And then I saw blood on my sunglass lens. I go, oh, now I'm bleeding. and then I stopped after about 10 meters of this tumble. And luckily my friends were actually behind me, and they were terrified watching this happen. And one of them came running down, and thankfully he's a ski patroller and certified with emergency medical treatment. And he first checked me, asked me what I had for breakfast. And I go, I know, he's checking to see if I have a concussion. And then I told him I had blueberries, And then luckily I did not have a concussion. I asked if I needed stitches in my head. He said, well, I think you should get it looked at. And then I go, and my foot hurts. Can you tape my ankle up for me? So it turned out that I couldn't walk because the pain was so severe. And luckily my friends carried me out to the road. The three of my climbing partners took turns carrying me, like piggyback on their backs. And then my other climbing partner friends were around the corner, and they took me to the hospital. Turned out I had a fractured heel bone.
Oh,
and that's the most radical injury I've ever had in my life.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so how old are you when that happened?
66.
Wow. That's a lot of adventuring before that, and that was the worst of it.
Yeah,
wow.
That was the worst. And luckily, like I said, no concussion, and 9 staples and 3 stitches. And then I still have some pretty gnarly scarring on my legs, but that's kind of like my tattoos in life. But the foot injury, that was so crazy, because they said, okay, you're going to have to be in this ortho boot for like 2 to 3 months, and use crutches, 0 weight bearing. And so that's what I did. And I'd been in crutches before for about 5 days. But this was like, oh my gosh. Have either of you had to do crutches? Mm-mm. Oh, so not fun.
I should have.
So not fun.
Yeah, I tore ligaments in my ankle, and I should have, but I just walked on.
Yeah, crutches, they suck. Life with crutches. But anyways, I lived through it.
2 months? You did 2 months on crutches?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. 2 months, no weight bearing, and then moved on. And I'm still 7 months later. I still have a little bit of a limp and some still stiffness in my foot and ankle.
So where's your headspace when you have to go through that? Because, you're obviously someone who loves being out in the world, being active, engaged in the welfare of others and whatnot. How do you navigate a time like you've just gone through? How do you keep your spirits high or get through that sort of challenge?
It was really a challenge. That's a good word for it. And it was a journey, because it was difficult, but I said, okay, just think about what you can do, and don't think about the things that you aren't able to do at this time, because it's just going to really drive you nuts to think about, I can't go surfing, I can't go rock climbing. So I just kept thinking, okay, what can I do? And the one thing that I could do after I think it was about a month, was to swim in a pool. And so luckily where I live in the condo, there's a little small, I call it the kidney bean pool, because it's little, thing. And I would just go there with my crutches and boot every day and just get in the water and just be at least in water. And I'd put on a mask and snorkel and just kick, and and I think that was also helpful. My podiatrist was very happy to hear me ask that question. Can I go swimming? And she said, yes. And I went, okay. And I don't know how much people ask those kind of things. And I just really tried to not go into the space that doesn't support healing, like feeling sorry for myself. And like I said, not thinking of the things that I can't do, and just think of what I can do and all the physio that I was going to be doing and all that. So
was that an artful time for you? Were you creating?
Some people asked me, said, oh yeah, well, you can do more painting. And I didn't do more art. I just kept my nose to the activism.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did a little bit of painting. Tiny bit more.
Did you have a bit of a goal at the end of that rehabilitation period? Or did you have a trajectory that you're working toward? I know it seems like from your Instagram that you surfed at the surf ranch not so long after that rehab period. Was that a bit of a motivating factor for you?
Well, interestingly enough, I had already gotten to the point where my healing was allowing me to walk a little bit more, and I was able to get down to the beach and boogie board. I still couldn't, stand up on a surfboard and stuff. So I was already in that phase, and then I got to a phase of paddling on one of the sponge boards. And I'm like, okay, and now I can paddle on a board. And then I started to try to stand up. And then it was right about that time that I got an email with the invitation to go to the surf ranch. And I went, well, I don't know. And I told them that, it was a month away. I go, I'm not sure if I'll be able to surf that wave at that time, but I'll keep in touch if that's okay. And they were very kind and understanding. And each day that I could be in the water, I would just go out there and paddle. I was determined. I said I was on a mission, and I started to just get up on my feet. I stubbed my toe once really badly, and that was another little setback. This injury has had a lot of little setbacks along the way.
I think feet injuries often do. Had ankle ligaments torn.
No idea.
And even getting to the beach, navigating sand with a foot injury is so difficult.
The sand in crutches?
I was already out of crutches by then.
Okay.
I was released from crutches and boot by then. Yeah, but it was still like I'd park as close as I could, so I would do minimal walking on the sand and all that. But yeah, and so then as I got closer and closer, it was literally by the day I was going, I think I can do it. I think I'll be able to. And then I got an ear infection.
Oh,
like
wow.
5 days before. But, I went to my acupuncturist, I put stuff in my ears, herbal things and all that. And literally the morning of going to the surf ranch, I was like, okay, I think the ear infection is pretty clear now. So I said one thing after the other. It was really, like I said, this whole journey.
How was that experience for you?
To surf at the surf ranch?
Yeah.
It was really a pleasure to go there. I had no expectations. I had no idea what it was going to be like. And I pull up, and there's all this really friendly, wonderful vibes. The place is pretty nice. Have you been there yet, Dave? Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. Or Lauren. And yeah, just really, really good vibes. They had this all organized and everything. And it turned out that I was in the last, what they called them, heats. So they organize it in groups so that you can not be a crowd out in the water. And yeah, and so I had all this time in between the briefing and then the actual surfing that I actually got 2 sessions of yoga in, just to kind of help psych myself up. It's like, okay, I'm going to just really work on the yoga and get myself as ready as I can. And
it makes me think about anytime anyone mentions the wave pool branch of the surfing tree, I get very curious about people's perspective on that, but I'm more curious about the general direction of surfers and surfing in terms of caring for country. So that's what people say here in Australia, country meaning country where we live, belong and survive as a part of.
Sea country being part of that.
Yeah, sea country, land country, and caring for country and the potential, because I know that we've felt this in the past where we've hoped surfers would turn up at an IWC. We've hoped surfers would turn up at an event in Santa Barbara in the harbour there to slow down shipping rates for the grey whales and the whales off Santa Barbara. We've hoped that surfers will turn out at a million things, and often we let each other down. Often we want more. Often we're like, where are we all? And I've always felt that the wave pool fascination is going to make it even harder to get surfers to turn up to things where if you live in a metropolis, a heavily urbanised area, and your water quality is poor, you get an ear infection, then, oh well, you'll just go to the wave pool that's nearby and go get your fix that way. And perhaps that's just another way to draw surfers away from caring for country more and being deeply embedded in their coastal ecology because, whatever, I can just go get my surfing fix at the wave pool, which is what is happening in Melbourne right now. There's so many people who will choose just to go to the pool rather than go down the coast to Bells Beach or go to somewhere and have an actual ocean surfing experience. So I was just curious what your point of view is, not so much on the wave pool thing, but about the trajectory of surfers, engaged surfers, turning up or not to care for country. What do you feel is the direction?
And what have you seen?
Yeah, are there more or less of us now? What's your feeling on that?
I haven't really thought so much about the topic of the wave pools and like there's one in Texas and one in Arizona, miles away from the real ocean, and there probably isn't a lot of wildlife around those places either. I really feel like what you were saying earlier about slave world. I say that too. I refer to SeaWorld as Slave World.
Oh, right on.
It really is.
You do, great.
Yeah, and then Miami Seaquarium is Miami Slave Aquarium.
Can you clarify why? I think this is an important point because we have people reach out to us a lot actually and want to talk on the podcast about the importance of aquariums and zoos in conservation education. Can you clarify why you don't feel that way?
Well, those facilities like Miami Seaquarium, Miami Slave Aquarium, and SeaWorld, Slave World, those places, they're not really about education. They might try to use that as a spin, but really that's not, to me, an appropriate or even accurate way of presenting conservation. You see dolphins and orcas and belugas and all these animals, including sea lions and other animals that they have in these places that are nowhere near their natural environment. They're not living any kind of a natural life. How can anybody say, well, look at these dolphins? They don't talk about how these dolphins in the wild will swim 50 plus miles a day. How they've evolved in social groups, in pods, whereas in these places, they're captive bred, and then they ship them back and forth in different places. And I strongly recommend watching the documentaries Blackfish and The Cove to see what's going on with these cetaceans in captivity.
Yeah. I worked at one of those facilities straight out of university because I was so ready to do environmental work, and there was a job nearby to where I grew up. And I saw firsthand, I was doing quote, environmental education, and it didn't take long to feel really depressed by the state of the dolphins at that particular facility. Especially, we'd have to quote the statistic about how the facility that we were at was the home of the world's longest living dolphin. And what you didn't see next to that statistic, or what the public didn't see, was the way that this dolphin was forced to swim in circles all day long. And how, all of us know this, quantity is no measure and is not indicative of quality of life. And if you really go and you look, closely at these places, you see pretty low quality of life for highly intelligent, sentient creatures.
Wow, that must have been quite an experience.
It was. Wow. It was. I couldn't stay working there for very long, obviously.
They banned you from talking about the Cove too?
I had to sign a waiver that I wouldn't discuss the Cove. That was just when the Cove was coming out.
The perspective on that I always share that made a big impact on me was from Captain Paul Watson from Sea Shepherd, long time ago, when somebody approached him about this topic and about the educational aspect of a lot of these facilities, and that they do great things for kids and educating families. And his was, imagine if you were from another planet, you came here to study humans, and you went to a solitary confinement prison, looked at that one person sitting inside that cell, and then based your understanding on the human species on that individual. How skewed your perspective would be on the species, and that's exactly what we're doing with animals in captivity. And so I would say, for me, that perspective really rings true, and the understanding that you had your experience with the grey whale and watching dolphins surf in Yamba and Garrick. I've had many of those same experiences that have altered the course of our lives. Lauren, you would have too, I'm sure. So many surfers have. And then you think of watching a tortured, trained dolphin doing tricks in a pool because they haven't been fed for 24 hours and that's what they'll do to get their next fish. And you clap and you smile and you leave. You might talk about it for a week and how your kids or your friends' kids were lit up about it, and then you forget about it. The course of your life has not been altered. The depth of your spirit hasn't been plumbed and then stirred into action that can carry you for a lifetime, which is what's happening for you, Peggy. And so I really feel that this conversation with you is so enlivening. I've pretty much had goosebumps the whole time. Look at my arm. Because it stirs in me all of these aspects of magic, of meaning, of giving a life of play. You've skated and surfed and rock climbed and pursued so many of the very enjoyable, stretching, challenging things that one can do for oneself. And in unison with that is all your work for the well-being of other animals. And you can see how it lights you up and makes a meaningful life. And I hope that listeners can feel that and perhaps express and incorporate that into their own life and in their own way. And I just want to really say thank you for making the time with us today, but also a thank you for working and playing so diligently for so long with the welfare and the well-being of others at the forefront of your actions.
Well, thank you, Dave. And I would say that really reflects how I appreciate you as well. You know, all the things that you're doing, and, you know, surfing legend and activist for dolphins in the oceans. You know, I really appreciate it. And this goes back to your experience with the Maui dolphins. I wanted to ask you because I thought I had read that you also were in an area where you were in fog or something, or rough sea, some hazardous sea conditions, and then the Mauis were guiding you through that. Was I understanding correctly?
That happened after it. So yeah, I'd anticipated the wind coming up so that I would reach these headwaters. I can't remember, what's the name? Is it the Manukau? The heads that come off Auckland? I should know.
I think that's Manukau.
It's the Manukau. It's a very, very, very treacherous patch of water. And they actually guided me, or just were with me, till I got to the edge of that water. And it was very foggy and I was alone. There's no communication, there's no support boats, there's nothing. It's just paddling along the coast. And because there was no wind, the fog set in, you could barely see the shoreline. And that green water turned brown. It was like oil and water. There was a very distinct line. And that's where the Mauis turned around and went back south. And then I had to navigate the next couple kilometres of fresh and salt water, which was the most turbulent water I've ever been in my life. And I was on a 16-foot slug of a board that doesn't handle treacherous water very well. And anyway, I'd mistimed it because the wind didn't come. I'd missed the incoming tide, so now the tide was going out, which was making all the swell stand up, and I had to fight against that outgoing water. And that ended up taking me nearly 2 hours to just go through a couple kilometres of water. But it was fantastic. I loved every second of it because it was just, I was powered up from being with the Maui's dolphin. It was that day of my dad's anniversary of leaving. It was emotional, and I had to watch every little inch of water, basically, until I finally got into the heads and came in onto the sand and just let out a big primal scream, and it was just so stoked. It was a very, very cool moment in my oceanic life.
You are a classic example of a surfer that gives back.
Well, tries, I guess. But, you know, those things, they're responses a lot of the time, aren't they? Because you go somewhere and if you are having chats with locals and you are engaged and being somewhat open, like you were saying earlier, and you hear, there's this beautiful animal and they're up against so many challenges, and there's this group of people who want to do something about that, and that you might be able to paint a mural or create an artwork that becomes the postcard, the catch cry for those animals and those people. Or I am someone who might be able to have the ear of lots of surfers through our surfing magazines or websites or whatever. Then it's just a response. It feels like a natural response to that opportunity to be useful. And especially if you've lived a surf rat life where you're pretty useless, it's great to feel useful sometimes. And even if we can do that in obscure ways, is important, and it feels like it's the least you can do. It's a response to that request from other surfers, or be them human or otherwise, dolphin surfers, whatever. It feels like it's just what you have to do. Wouldn't you say? You're a lot of your activism, you just feel like it's just what you have to do.
I think it goes back, if I'm understanding correctly, to what Lauren had brought up about the braiding sweetgrass, the gift. And we're so fortunate to have the gift of appreciation of the gifts that we have from the ocean and from this amazing planet and all the living beings on this planet, and to just think about what we love and to be able to give back. And I say, when I'm doing my public speaking and stuff, I tell people, I don't expect you to save whales with me, but just think about something that matters to you. It doesn't have to be whales. It can be cleaning up the beach. It can be volunteering at an animal shelter. It could be volunteering for elderly people or to youth programs, or doing something positive in the planet that matters the most to each person, because we're all different, and something else matters to different people more than others. And I really think that that's a good way to be. And to maybe turn off that TV for a few hours, and just, instead of it being this thing that just sort of mesmerizes people, to just think about what's happening out in the world, because we need people to be doing things, everybody to be doing things. And going back to the conversation about the surfers and being disappointed that we don't see out of the 1,000 surfers in Santa Barbara County, or whatever that number is, it might be much more, and then seeing only a few show up, it's like, oh, we have such a precious gift. I hope that more will give back. We'll somehow be touched by this amazing life-giving ocean and the beings that inspire us, the pelicans that soar over us, or the dolphins, or the seal that pops its head up and looks at you, and things like that. Those are things that inspire me.
I really appreciate the way that surfing isn't always, but can be a way to deepen our sense of compassion. And the conversation around zoos and aquariums, it felt important for me to say that we're not coming to that conversation in a judgy way, but just suggesting that it's a great conversation to have, especially as a family, to sit down and say, okay, how can we think compassionately about this decision that we're going to make to support this institution or not? Which ones are appropriate to support? Which ones are not? And on that note of compassion, Peggy, I was wondering if you can suggest any resources or practices for people who are interested in expanding their sense of compassion for the more than human world.
Well, I actually have a list that I've been accumulating, and it depends on different things. I mentioned earlier, as far as the topic of captivity of cetaceans, to watch the documentary Blackfish and The Cove. And for people who are interested in animal welfare, people who are animal lovers, I don't know if they actually know, but they could learn and know what actually happens to animals in most meat food production industries, the animal agriculture, industrial animal agriculture, such as presented in early on, there was the documentary Earthlings. There since has been Dominion, which was produced in Australia. And there's a shorter documentary that Sir Paul McCartney narrates, and it's Glass Walls. And they would be, I must warn people, difficult to watch, difficult for me to watch, but that's the truth. And if somebody wants to know really where their meat and their dairy and animal products come from, it's important to watch those. And then, of course, some people may not care as much about the animals. They might care about the future of their children and the planet and climate catastrophe that's been going on. And we're really, I think, into it now. So for that topic, there was the documentary Cowspiracy, which, when did that come out? It's been a while now, at least 5 or 6 years now. And since then, there's another documentary that came out, Eating Our Way to Extinction. And that came out, I believe, from British filmmakers. And that really kind of took Cowspiracy up the next level. as far as even more things that it really addressed, very well filmed. And now Eating Our Way to Extinction is free on YouTube in 20 different languages. And then the Dominion Earthlings and Glass Walls are also free online for viewing. What other topics? What other documentaries? Oh, health reasons. I haven't seen Forks Over Knives, and I'm not sure how much they cover on that, but the more recent documentaries, What the Health, which was made by the filmmakers of Cowspiracy, they talk about the quote-unquote health insurance industry, health industry topic in the United States. So that's spelled What the Health, as in the word health, and kind of coining a phrase. And then there's another documentary that was made by James Cameron, and that's The Game Changers. And that's really focusing more on athletes who want to have maximum performance through plant-based diet. And it was really quite interesting. And I met somebody who had said that he was vegetarian, but he was going to go vegan after seeing The Game Changers. Yeah.
Which campaigns are capturing your heart and your time right now, and how can we get involved?
Thank you for asking that question. I would say that I've focused many of the past 8 or so years on helping Tokite Lolita. She's known as Lolita at the Miami Seaquarium, but I refer to her as Tokite, which is a more respectful name for her. She's a lone female orca that's been at the Miami Seaquarium for over 52 years now. Amazingly, she's still alive in the smallest tank in North America. On the brighter side of that, after all these decades, there is a group of, like a coalition of 3 organizations together, well, 2 organizations and 1 individual, that are in a cooperative working sort of agreement with the new owners of the Miami Seaquarium. This all just started happening, all these things started happening about 15, 16 months ago, and different news items, and it's kind of been like a little roller coaster, and I'm just trying to stay steady and campaigning, all this, but there's some hope that she may actually be released to a sea sanctuary. And on December 13th will be a more official announcement on her future. So things, after all these years, we might be celebrating. And with that, going back to what I was sharing about my art installation, my environmental art installation with the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. this past June, July, I really feel that it's time to get back to my Origami Whales project, but with raising awareness about bycatch entanglement. And so doing more installations where I engage the public. And that's what I love about the Origami Whales project, because anyone of whatever, like kids, I don't know how old kids are when they can start folding origami, but simple origami whales and dolphins, whatever that age is, on up, everybody can fold origami whales and dolphins and contribute to the installation, which is what I love. That participation and engagement and raising awareness and empowerment all together. I just love that. And it was kind of auspicious that how it all came together, and so it was a little over a year ago in November when I was in Dominica, and I went on this trip to swim with sperm whales. And it was like my life, literally my only personal life dream, to be eye to eye with sperm whales.
Wow.
I say I'm a sperm whale groupie.
Did it happen?
Yeah.
Wow.
And our expedition guide was like, wow, this is a really good encounter. He kept saying that like from the first day. It was like every day we had these really good encounters. But I was very much wanting to connect with them. I didn't have a camera with me. It was all about I just want to be present with them. And I was looking in the eye of a sperm whale calf. It was looking at me, and our eyes were just like kind of meeting, we weren't super close, but just, I know that we were looking at each other. And I just said, you are just one of the most beautiful, amazing beings on the planet. And I'm going to do everything I can for you. And I asked myself, what can I do for the sperm whales? What can I do? And this project to raise awareness about entanglement, I think, is a big one. Yeah, because most people don't realize this. It doesn't get out in the mainstream media. But the International Whaling Commission Scientific Committee has studied bycatch entanglement for a long time. And they have on their website, it's easy to find, that over 300,000 whales and dolphins every year die from bycatch or entanglement. So bycatch is when fishing boats go along and they trawl their nets and they catch all these things and all these different non-target species. They might be going for one particular species of fish, but then they often will get way more, higher percentage of non-target, and those all get thrown overboard, mostly dead.
It's really important to clarify that if you're eating fish, if you're eating seafood, probably your seafood can be linked back to industrial fishing, unless you're specifically seeking out seafood that isn't captured that way. So there's a big conversation.
That is a really important thing. And I also, again, will mention the documentary Seaspiracy to raise awareness about all these things that are going on in the world's oceans, because for anybody who cares about any living being in the ocean, I think that it's a really important thing to know. Yeah, that's the biggest killer. And half of ocean plastics comes from discarded fishing gear, discarded and lost fishing gear. And then that is the source of entanglement. So we see these reports in the news and video of a humpback whale that was entangled in fishing gear, and then they managed after several hours, and it was very dangerous because this is a very upset being that's got all this stuff wrapped around it, and they rescued it and it swam away, and it was like, that's a very rare story amongst the hundreds of thousands every year. So I just hope that more people will become aware of that, and through that, the installment art project, I hope that helps.
How can people get involved with that project?
At this point, it's still in the early stages, but maybe to follow me on Instagram or. I've also been collaborating with a couple of really great women, young women who are much more techie than me. So Katie of Sharktopia and Media by Mads, Madison, they've been helping me. We've been working together on a new website, cetaceans.org. And there's a link that, about each of us. And then from there, you can see some of the photos from my entanglement installation. Yeah.
Are you optimistic about the future of our planet?
With so much of the news going on and the climate catastrophes and reports of another species going extinct and some of the violence and things that happens out there that are imposed by humans on other beings in the planet, it's really hard to be optimistic on one hand. But I really believe that we need to focus on what we want, focus on the things that bring us joy and that are fulfilling to us. And I tell you, it's been some long battles, environmental campaigns and stuff. But to see what's happened for Tokite after 52 years in captivity, there's like some hope. And there's recent, I focus on the good news. And of course, I'm very aware. I read up on these other things that are not so good. But to go, okay, well, what can I do about it? And that's, I think, how, as I was approaching that whole thing with my injury, is focusing on what we can do instead of what we can't do or what bums us out and all that kind of thing is. So we recently, last week, celebrated the great news at CITES, Convention on International Trade of Endangered Species, that they voted to protect sharks and rays at the highest level so far. Not the highest level possible, but they're going to actually do something about helping the sharks, because we know that the sharks have been really getting hit hard. The number that I could find when I was presenting numbers on bycatch entanglement was something like 50 million sharks a year from bycatch entanglement. And then I've heard that 100 million per year from the shark finning industry. So imagine, that's not a sustainable number for the health of our oceans. So that was a great victory. I've just been like, yeah, riding on that. And what else? There's been some more good news. Oh, yeah, there's a hotel casino in Las Vegas called the Mirage. And they've had dolphins in these literal swimming pools that people, would pay to get their photos with and all that. And the new owners, Hard Rock Cafe, have announced that they're not going to keep the dolphins in those pools anymore. The uncertain thing is, where will these dolphins go next? There's no sea sanctuary for dolphins in the US. And unfortunately, because of their captivity in these stressed conditions, they have a contagious illness called something like pox morbillovirus. And so I'm not sure where they're going to be sent, but I think it'll be better wherever they go. And I think that there's some folks, conservation organizations, hopefully working behind the scenes on where will be a good place for them to go.
It feels like the cultural climate around especially cetacean captivity is so different now than it was 10, 20 years ago. You're not an extremist now to voice your concerns.
Yeah.
You're totally reasonable in the eyes of all now, it seems like. It's just more, there's a lot of little nuanced aspects to it, but I do feel like it's very different now.
Yeah, I agree with you. I see the changes coming. That when I last did my TED talk about circuses, I did my whole TED talk about environmental art and what I was doing, all these things, but I mentioned a victory, which was that at least 13 countries in the world have banned circuses with wild animals. And so let's keep that going, folks. That people are realizing that it's cruel and it's not a nice way to entertain people, so just thinking of those victories, remembering the victories is what I'm about. And the one thing I'd like to share with United Citizens of the United States, one of my big campaigns right now, because Toki Tabe right now is her situation is kind of in a limbo state, but hoping towards her freedom. It's really looking the most promising it's ever been. But there's something that I've been working on now for a couple months, and it's called the SWIMS Act. And it is legislation that was introduced by Senator Feinstein and then representatives, 3 representatives. And it would basically ban the transporting, captive breeding of the orcas, false killer whales, pilot whales, and belugas in the United States. And literally it would ultimately lead to them no longer being in captivity because, so that's a really important, I'm calling it the game changer legislation. So I've been campaigning a lot on that, and it's on my Instagram, been talking a lot about that. It's sometimes in my stories and stuff, and it's on the top button of my Linktree to write your legislators, and we make it very easy with information and then sample letter, and then you can personalize your letter. And this is a really powerful way, because in the world of online email petitions, all that, you have to get hundreds of thousands of people to sign these things. But when you actually do a real hard copy letter or meet with the legislator in person, that is far more powerful. And I just so happened to be able to meet with my legislator. And since then, he signed on. He decided to co-sponsor the bill. So it's like, yes. And it just takes following, your passion and doing these things. And some people might be shy about actually meeting with your legislator, but you can write a letter. And we're seeing more good news with that sort of thing. So
it's amazing how a simple act like that can actually be the most powerful. You can engage in all of absorbing media, sharing media, clicking, but actually to sit down and write a letter to your local counselor or senator or representative can be a powerful and tangible form of activism.
Part of it is that it stands out also because it's not very common now.
Yeah,
Most people just, they go, hit the button, type my name, hit the button. But if you actually sit down, they know that there was a lot of effort that went into that. But we make that effort easier through our sample letter. But no, really, and that's how we're trying to facilitate the most powerful actions is something like that. And
I feel like this conversation really sings the praises of the real lived experience of getting out into the world and, as you said earlier, like dolphins do, playing, taking advantage of the fact that we, like cetaceans, maintain this sense of neoteny, and that's the holding on to childlike, playful characteristics into adulthood. And what a gift that is.
It really is a gift.
Thanks for listening with us today. If you have a spare moment, please leave us a review or consider sharing an episode with a friend. Both help us to find the very best stories from our global community of water people. This episode was edited by Ben Alexander. The podcast soundtrack was composed by Shannon Sol Carroll, with additional tunes improvised by Dave and goofy-footed legends Neil Purchase Jr. and Christian Barker. We'll be continuing today's conversation on Instagram, where we're at Water People Podcast.